Hey, what's up folks? How's it going? This is Waj. So the 3DR Solo has been out for a couple of months now. We actually did an unboxing several months back, but it's not until recently where they've made the actual Solo gimbal available. And since this thing is basically a flying camera platform, I want to make sure that I had the gimbal alongside my GoPro Hero 4 in order to capture the best kind of footage possible and to show you what this thing is really capable of. But the real question is the 3DR Solo drone worth it compared to every other flying camera platform that you can get out there? It's a very crowded space right now, very competitive, and do the benefits really serve any kind of advantage compared to everything else out there? So if you're interested in the 3DR Solo smart drone, let's get right into the full review. Now physically, the Solo looks great. It looks very sleek and stylish with its all black paint job. Physically, it's not too large. It's about 330 millimeters by 330 millimeters, and it's about 190 millimeters in terms of its height. Now it is quite a heavy drone once you have the gimbal and your GoPro installed, weighing just about 1.8 kilograms. Now one of the interesting features about the 3DR Solo is that you actually have an accessory bay located at the rear of the gimbal, and this will basically allow you to attach third-party devices and potentially upgradable features of the drone itself. So you can add things like a parachute, an optical flow sensor for more accurate performance when you're hovering at lower altitudes, and even flying in indoor conditions. All this stuff sounds pretty promising. We'll have to see if it actually works down the road. Currently, there's not really many accessories available at this point. Now, in terms of the flight performance, the 3DR Solo uses very powerful 880 kV brushless motors, giving it the ability to go almost 90 kilometers an hour, which is crazy fast. You can also ascend up to 10 meters per second. Now, in terms of altitude, you're specifically limited to about 400 feet or about 122 meters. Now, even though there is an option in the Solo app to go unlimited, it still locks you in at around 122 meters. Now, straight off the bat, one of the biggest limiting factors of this UAV is the fact that you only have half a mile range, about 800 meters, which is crazy limiting compared to what the Phantom series of drones can do, and indeed what other people are doing in the DIY community. And I'm sure the RF capabilities of the Solo is up there with everything else, but I think what's limiting it is the live HD feed from the GoPro. It seems to cut off as you go further and further, and most likely I'm sure the drone can be operated more than 1 kilometer away, but at this point there are some things dragging it down, perhaps related to software and perhaps related to the GoPro integration. Now the controller on this thing is really darn impressive. It actually has a 1 gigahertz processor built in, and it also doubles as a black box. So if you get into a crash or if the drone flies away, it'll actually record all that data and log it into its built-in memory. And what's cool about this feature is that if anything weird happens out of the ordinary, like your drone flies away for no reason whatsoever, the controller should theoretically log that, and you can actually send that information to 3D Robotics, and they'll potentially even reimburse you if it was a software related issue unrelated to the external environment. Now, as you can see, the controller also has a built-in display which will show you relevant information depending upon what you're doing, such as battery life. Here you can see some information on the angle of our gimbal, and once you're actually flying, it'll display relevant information such as flight speed and altitude. The controller also has a haptic feedback system, so it'll give you little pulses when you press certain types of buttons or when it wants to get your attention. The ergonomics of the controller is really great, no complaints there. Your thumbs, no matter what size of hands, you will be perfectly placed just around the region where you have those 2 analog thumbsticks, and you can also change the configuration of what those thumbsticks do. Now, some other cool buttons you'll find on the controller include the emergency brake or the air brake, and you can basically hit that button anytime where you will have a panic moment and you're about to hit something, and it'll stop the drone from moving, hopefully avoiding any kind of collision, and definitely a great feature that I think every drone should have. Besides that, you have a return to home button, so you can press that anytime you want the drone to come back to its initial takeoff position. More to the center of the controller, you have a fly button, and this is basically an automatic system that will automatically take off the drone and also automatically land the drone whenever you want to do so. And lastly, on the left hand side, we have 2 user programmable buttons. You can basically configure these two buttons to do a whole bunch of different things in the Solo app. Moving over to the anterior portion of the controller, on the left you have a dial that allows you to make fine adjustments to the angle of your Solo gimbal, and on the opposite side of that you have two buttons that allows you to preset different gimbal angles. So you could set one to 0 degrees, one to 90 degrees, and in the middle you have a dial that changes the speed of the movement between the two presets. Last but not least, one of the great things about this controller is that we have a built-in mini HDMI port. Now you could use this for a couple of different things. You can obviously connect the controller to an external display or even to some goggles for some FPV action. And even cooler, you can live stream the feed that's coming out of the drone directly to the internet if that tickles your fancy. Now the controller itself creates a Wi-Fi signal allowing you to connect to it via the 3DR Solo app that's installed on your iOS or Android device. Now the app is pretty awesome. You get a 720p HD feed from the GoPro to your smartphone or whatever device, and you have pretty minimal latency, but the quality does diminish once you start increasing the distance between the controller and the drone itself. Now even though this is one of the exclusive drones out there that natively support GoPro cameras, there are some unfortunate quirks that you're going to have to deal with. The first matter of business is the control over your camera settings. Well, unfortunately, you don't have any control whatsoever. You really can only stop and start recording. And besides that, you have no other controls to speak of regarding the GoPro. And in addition, every time you do stop and start a recording, you get about a 1 to 3 second interference gap between the feed where it cuts off, which is certainly kind of jarring and does reduce the seamlessness of the whole interface. Now, since this thing is basically a flying camera platform, the Solo gimbal is an absolute must. The footage that you get from the passive GoPro mount that comes with the $1,000 drone is absolutely unusable and defeats the purpose of this product in the first place. Now, many people who got the gimbal installed it and found out that the footage was actually not that great. You had a lot of nasty vibration, and the culprit was the fact that the installation is actually a little bit trickier than people initially imagined. Basically, if any wire is touching the gimbal itself, you will get these nasty vibration and gyrations, which will completely ruin your footage and throw off the balance of the gimbal. So you definitely want to make sure that when you're installing it to be extra careful of making sure every little wire and component is as far away from the gimbal as possible. I actually had to take off the top of the drone in order to address some of the vibration issues with wires touching. Thankfully, 3DR is shipping drones now that have a little bit better wiring routing with less interference, hopefully for the gimbal, but that's something that everyone should probably address if they're getting these nasty vibrations. Now, the good news is the gimbal itself is quite fantastic. It's of course specifically designed for the GoPro Hero 3 Plus and the Hero 4. I'm using the Hero 4 Black, which gives me the ability to record full 4K resolution and 30 FPS. And if you like basically the look of the GoPro cameras and the capabilities of them, you're going to generally like the image coming out of the 3DR. And from an imaging standpoint, I'm really darn impressed with the footage coming off of this thing. Some really spectacular and epic looking shots. I've had quite a while, several hours of flight time. And if you want to check out a video in full 4K resolution with the footage coming out of this thing, definitely click here right now or check out the link of the video in the description down below. But generally, the only real issue I have with using the GoPro is that you do get quite a bit of the fisheye distortion. So the lens distortion is going to be present because the perspective is quite wide on the 4K settings. Unfortunately, you can't go to a standard viewing angle like you can in some of the lower resolutions on the GoPro, and it certainly doesn't look as straight and as flat as the footage coming out of something like the Phantom 3 that has that built-in 4K camera. Now, one of the reasons why this is called a smart drone is because it has the smart shots, and essentially here you have 4 different smart shots to choose from. You have the cable cam, which locks the Solo onto a virtual cable between any 2 points in space. It's essentially just like having a giant camera slider, but it's in the air. Furthermore, you have the orbit, where the Solo will automatically circle a particular object, and this is kind of cool if you want that wraparound shot. The selfie is pretty explanatory. It basically locks onto your particular location and moves in and out relative to that position. Lastly, the follow smart shot is pretty interesting. You can basically go hands-free over here, and the Solo will lock onto your controller's position and follow you wherever you go. Now, what these smart shots essentially allow everyone to do is just take out the skill level involved in performing some of these shots if you didn't have all these automatic features. And that being said, I think with some practice, pretty much anybody can learn to do an orbit move or to do a selfie move or any of these type of smart smart shots, but it'll just take some time to master. Really what the Solo does is take out the guesswork and skill involved in performing these initially complicated maneuvers. Now last but not least, let's talk about the battery performance. Now basically the battery is very similar to what you would expect on a Phantom. It has a couple of LED indicators for how much juice is left, as well as a button to actually turn on the drone. In terms of specifications, it's 5200 milliamp hours, 14.8 volts, and in terms of realistic flight times, depending upon how aggressive you are with the controls, you can get anywhere between 17 and 20 minutes based on my experience with the Solo Gimbal and the Hero 4 Black. Now that flight time is pretty passable. Again, you have to consider that the Solo is pretty heavy relative to its size. I think most long-term users are probably going to want to invest in a second battery. Luckily, however, the charge time isn't too bad. I got from 0 to 100% charge in just about an hour's time. Now to sum up everything we've talked about thus far, let's actually do a pros and cons list to determine the worth of this drone. We'll start with the things that I didn't like about it. Firstly, you can only shoot video from the front of the drone itself. Now this is not a big deal. Most drones in this category, such as the Phantom 3, Phantom 2, always shoot from the front anyways, but it would have been pretty awesome to have a gimbal system that can rotate 360 degrees so you can get full range of motion like you can get in something like the Inspire 1 or some other really higher end drones, but sadly that's not the case over here. Moreover, as we mentioned earlier in the video, the installation process of the gimbal is not straightforward at all. If you do get any kind of wiring contact between the gimbal and some of the wires inside the drone, you will see nasty vibrations, and this should have been addressed from a design perspective earlier, where this problem shouldn't happen to anybody, but sadly you do see many people suffering from this problem during the initial installation of the gimbal. And other drones similarly do not have any of these issues, where the gimbal itself is mounted external of the drone, where contact of the internal wires is avoided altogether. Furthermore, as we mentioned before, the GoPro integration is fairly good in terms of getting that HD feed and having the ability to stop and start recording, but you do not have any other controls. No controls for your video settings, for your picture settings. Everything will have to be done either through the GoPro app specifically or on the GoPro itself before you ever go flying in the first place. So that's definitely a little bit of a hassle that everyone has to deal with. Additionally, I found that the drone takes a little bit of time to lock on to as many satellites it's required to lock onto. Sometimes it's just a minute, but other times it's actually a couple of minutes, and it definitely can get a little bit tedious waiting for the drone to lock onto the satellites, and it just adds to the time before you can actually start flying the thing. Now another con is regarding the price point. Although I wouldn't consider this thing to be too expensive compared to what's out there in the market, at $1,000 for the base model, it's certainly reasonable for the amount of technology that's in there. But when you start adding the price of the gimbal, which is definitely a necessity, you start looking at $1,400. And then if you have a GoPro Hero 4 camera, that's fantastic. But to get a Black Edition camera, it's another $500. So you're then looking at about $1,900 for the exact package that I was using to make this review video. But if you take a look at what's offered from the Phantom side, the Phantom 3 retails for just under $1,300, has a built-in camera, has a much higher range, great 4K quality, all-in-one solution as well, and certainly you can argue that it's not worth the price compared to that drone. But you do have to consider the fact that this works with the GoPro Hero 4 natively. If you get something like the Phantom 2, get a gimbal, and then get a whole bunch of accessories to make it work with the Hero 4 Black in order to get your monitoring up and running, it's definitely going to be closer to the range of what the 3DR Solo does. Plus the Solo has all those benefits that we mentioned in the review. So price is really relative, but $1,900 for this package is certainly not inexpensive. Now, one of the biggest limitations of the 3DR is certainly the range. At less than 1 kilometer, it's certainly not enough to do any kind of big, epic sweeping shots from a long distance away, and you're definitely tied down in that respect. But hopefully there'll be some kind of range extenders later on in the future, or perhaps even a software update that could extend the range, but it's a limitation that you're going to have to deal with straight out of the box. Now moving on to the pros of the 3DR Solo, firstly I have to say it's a great drone for even beginner novices. You have tons of different safety features such as the return to home. You have an airbag system, which is definitely very handy. You have the auto land and takeoff system, which takes the guesswork off of doing complicated maneuvers like that, and just plenty of handy controls to make it really easy to fly, where anybody can pick it up straight out of the box and be up in the air in just a few minutes. Another unique factor about the 3DR Solo is certainly the smart shots capabilities, where you can pretty much do these elaborate maneuvers without having to really master any skills at all. Just press a button, and the fact that it can just follow you around everywhere is kind of handy and cool too, if you just wanted to float up there and just follow you like an air dog. But generally speaking, they can even add different features via the software. So in this regard, some of these features really make the 3DR Solo pretty powerful compared to everything else that's out there. Furthermore, I'm a huge fan of the controller that comes with this drone. It's probably one of my favorite controllers found in an all-in-one aerial photography solution, where you have an LCD screen that'll give you important vital information. You have the haptic feedback system, and obviously an HDMI out where you can broadcast live of what you're shooting up in the air, which is certainly really cool. And last but not least, the footage really speaks for itself. If you like the footage coming out of the GoPro Hero 4 Black, you're gonna love this thing. The gimbal itself is rock solid smooth. Once you've set it up right and you don't have any vibrations against the wires, it's up there with anything else you're gonna find out there. And you can capture some really impressive looking footage that'll impress all your friends and your family. So in that regard, from a 4K flying camera platform, this is up there with anything else you're gonna compare it against. But really, other than that, guys, that's really it. Thank you so much for watching our full review of the 3DR Solo Smart Drone. Definitely let me know what you guys think in the comments section down below. And if you guys are interested in a direct comparison between this thing and the Phantom 3 Professional, we have a video up on the channel, and you can check out those two drones to see which one is best matched for your needs. But really, for this video, that's really it. I want to thank B&H Photo so much for making this video possible. They actually sent out the drone to us alongside the gimbal. So definitely check them out if you're interested in anything we talked about in this video. You'll find the link of the 3DR Solo, all the specification and pricing in the description down below. And thanks again to B&H for making this video possible. But other than that, thank you for watching, and we'll see you later. Take care.